Good morning, Leo. It's about like I think 5:30 a.m. or something. I didn't sleep, and this is just a thought dump on how I view technology and where I think it's going and why I think it's pretty cool. It's the biggest purpose is just to like play it back later, I guess, and how think about how I view certain topics in different points of my life. So it's just going to be a long, unedited monologue about it's just me rambling on about technology, I guess. So how I view it is technology is kind of like the ultimate tool, I believe, that we use to get what we want. So in its most basic form, like like that's what separates us from other animals. Is this ability to create tools and use tools to get what we want. So like sticks, we figured out that we could use sticks to reach a higher fruit in the tree. And then later on, we're like, we could strike two stones and make fire, and then the food tastes better. And then we found that refrigeration or cold weather tends to preserve food, and we don't get sick, if we eat food that's refrigerated. And then eventually, it's always been kind of helping us survive further. And the latest thing to come out of the latest form of technology that's really helped transform the world and really made it go exponentially is computing. And I think a lot of times people interchangeably use like computing and technology, or like interchangeably use them, but I think it's important to realize that like software is a subset of technology, such as hardware and everything. I just think it's one of the best or coolest forms of technology, but they're like different. But still, I'll talk about software in itself, and then maybe some other pieces of technology that I'm super excited about. So regarding software, first, there's this law, I believe, it's called Clark's Law, and it's like one of the three laws that he has. I believe it's the last one. He says any sufficient technology is indistinguishable from magic. And it takes a little while to think about that, but I couldn't agree with it more, and I think it's one of the coolest things that's been said about technology, is it really should not be the end goal. You shouldn't create things for the sake of technology. Because again, it is a tool, you should be using technology to solve a problem that you have or achieve something that you want. And software specifically is just the most scalable form. And even in creating things, different forms of creation, like physically making something or even writing something down or recording something like what I'm doing now, it's all creation. I think of all those, coding and software is one of the best, most efficient ones because it's so scalable. Anyone can write a piece of software or code and then have it run on millions of people's computers or phones just in a matter of like a couple hours. And it's because we have all this infrastructure around us and other software, like tools that help create tools at this point now that we can do all that. So regarding software itself, I'm personally really excited by it. I was lucky enough to kind of learn about it earlier on, and I think more people should. Besides that, the way I personally want to use technology or software is I want to create products that really anyone can use. And actually, let me rephrase that. I first want to identify like the big problems that people have and try to find the most suitable piece of technology to enable that, and make it kind of, it's my goal, it's my end goal to make technology disappear. And that kind of goes back into the whole magic thing. But a great example would be something like a photo storage service, right? If I take a bunch of photos and it uploads it to the cloud and I can retrieve it whenever I want, so iCloud has that, Google Photos has that. So for all I care, it could just be a bunch of like elves in the North Pole, where if I like send my phone sends photos to them and then they manually print it out and archive it in these massive file cabinets, and then whenever I want to retrieve it, they really quickly like pull it out from the cabinet, find the right ones, and then send it back to me and I can see it. For all I care, that could be it. I don't really care. It's more likely a bunch of code running, and with a series of redundancies, a bunch of my digital files stored in different parts of the world and edge clouds and stuff. But I shouldn't care as a consumer, and that's kind of my stance on software and technology. Is it should just help people do things. And secondly, I think the cool thing about technology, and the truth is, you're not really creating anything new. It's really the combination, like amalgamation of a lot of different pieces of technology arranged in a certain order that sometimes becomes one of the biggest innovations. And you could see that with something like the iPod. You know, they tried to fit 1,000 songs. I believe the goal was to put 1,000 songs into your pocket. And at the time, that was just a pretty tall order. And they didn't like invent everything from scratch. I think they found this small hard drive from a company in Japan that was kind of the state of the art, and it was like it was really small, but it had quite a bit of capacity. I'm not sure if it was a physical hard drive, it probably was, or if it was solid state, but they found it, and then they got some exclusive licensing to it, and they paired it with some really great software. They also paired it with a really intuitive user interface, such as the scroll wheel. And that's the sum. What it was is just like a bunch of parts put together. You know, they didn't create anything completely from scratch, and the end result was like hugely innovative. Same thing with the iPhone. The fact that you could put a touch screen on this thing or on a phone, and then like have other developers build apps for it and have a central app store and app purchases. All that stuff is just like an amalgamation of ideas put together, and the sum of the parts are greater than individual pieces together. So that's also what I try to do is I look at everything. I look at existing ideas and existing problems, and what can I put together that already exists in order to create something new. And with software creation, there's so many tools out there again that are open source, and just put them together and do it. And that's why I think most pieces of software that I want to create, I can do pretty quickly, or I try to do within 2 to 3 days. And I really believe everything and anything can be prototyped within like maximum 2 weeks, no matter how big or large, or no matter how small or big. And even enterprise software, that you can always find something to build on top of. It's kind of my philosophy. And secondly, the way you get it done that fast is, I guess, just believing it could be done in the first place. A lot of people just kind of throw that out the window, like, oh, that can't be done, that can't be built that fast. But like, how are you gonna know if you don't ever try? Or if you go into it thinking it can't be done, it probably won't get done, right? So you just have to grit your teeth and say, I'm gonna do this in a day or 2 days, and you just fucking do it. So that's the first part. Second part, the stuff that really excites me of what's to come is that I believe we're really at the cusp of big revolution. And this sounds super corny, but I think it's totally true. And the next thing that's coming is AI and machine learning. I think it's interesting that after like decades of computing and research and the way we've been training or programming computers, we are finally coming back to the human form, where we are basing computers off of how our humans learn and how our brain functions. And I think it's because the human body and our brain, and just like us, even physically, the human body is the most advanced piece of technology I think that exists in the world. I can't say the galaxy or the universe, but I think for sure in the world, or at least of what we've been able to find. And whoever created us, whether it's evolution or God, did a great job. And it's just, if you just stop and think about it, I think it's crazy. And I'm not much of a biology person. In fact, I really hated taking those classes in high school and college, but sometimes you like read about these chapters of how blood and stuff work, how like your liver filters things out, and there's like every organ has its function and stuff. And you're just like, wow, that's like hardcore technology. I couldn't imagine a system being able to do that. And again, it's interesting that humans have kind of come back into basing computers off of ourselves and how our brain works in order to advance further. Because really in the last 60 years, or whatever, 67 years since the invention of the computer as we know it, it's always been logic. We've always instructed computers. It started with punch cards and eventually, software, languages. But really, all it is just a series of if-then statements and like conditions. And it's like, if this happens, do this. If that happens, do this. Loop over this. And it's really just logic. But we're moving into territory where we're finally training computers, just like we're training humans. And how do human babies learn? It observes the world and it infers. So inference is, I believe, the key into unlocking the next step in computing, Because what's stopping me from being able to tell a computer, or at least now, like, hey, can you go through all this footage and then cut out all the silences and all the awkward parts and then export it to multiple formats and upload it to YouTube or something? That's something that's like a very tall order for computers right now, as hard as it is to believe if you're watching this later. But that's just a limitation, because it is a specific set of instructions that we do. And you can even still do it with instructions, but you're never going to be, it's different. If I just got someone else, if I got like an intern, if I paid someone, and I'm like, hey, can you do that? Can you go through this clip, all these clips, cut out the silences, edit it, and put it up? They could do that. So what's the difference between that human that I would be paying versus the computer that's seemingly incompetent or incapable? It's just the ability to infer and being able to take past data. Maybe that human that I will hire is an experienced editor and has just processed a bunch of like hundreds if not thousands of hours of video and cut it and has been trained. That's the difference. The computer is just like, is following instructions, and as long as it does have instructions to do that task, it will not be able to execute. And we're really unlocking the inference part. We give it a bunch of data. So say how an AI software would be able to do that task, that example task. I would just train it on just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours of video editing, and it will learn that, hey, like it'll have a bunch of series of inputs, right? So it's like, oh, if the audio level is below this point and if the frame is not moving that much, that must mean that I should cut it out. And then it eventually does that, and then if it's supervised learning, you'll be able to tell, you'll be able to reward a certain thing every time it does that, and then it kills out, or it breeds that in the next generation, and then you could penalize it if it does something wrong. So that's like exactly how we teach babies. It's like, if the baby does something that you don't want him to, then you scold him. And then if he does something well, then you give him an incentive. So that's what's exciting. That's a really first thing. And I personally have this theory that I've not named or anything, but I genuinely believe that any machines will be able to do any task a human can do at least 10,000 times more efficiently. And this includes even creative things that people normally don't associate machines to be able to take over, such as creating art, design, and anything else that's not logic. Because again, if we're able to train computers just like humans, right? Theoretically, they could do everything that humans can. And the one advantage they have, about many, over us, is the ability to stretch time. And this itself probably is I could talk about it for hours, but I've always said that time is one of the last things that people have not been able to conquer. Whatever happens, it just flows and it's ruthless, it just moves on. And we only have one time. But computers, on the other hand, are able to replicate or simulate time. So simulation is really the key to stretching time for them. So a good example is DeepMind, which is Google's AI company, was able to train this little guy, this little agent with multiple limbs to walk and run and avoid obstacles, much like a human person would. And the software was never trained or shown any form of human locomotion. So it never saw it, but the end result, after all the training and testing, you could see this thing with like multiple joints, like run and sprint and like jump obstacles. It looked really funny doing it, but to think that it never saw how humans really did it, and it was able to do that, sometimes even more efficiently than we can, is crazy. And that's something that if you just had an amoeba or like a bunch of like massive joints and limbs with maybe a little bit of logic in there, and just let it kind of figure it out, it would have taken, who knows, maybe like hundreds of thousands of years, over 1 million years, for it to actually evolve into that form over multiple generations. And you could say that if that creature's lifespan is like humans, like 100 years, then that could really stretch out into millions of years. But in that simulation, it was able to replicate, it was able to kind of go through each generation in like a millisecond or so. And so it took hundreds of thousands of generations, but eventually when it was rewarded every time it went to the right and penalized every time it went to the left, it was able to come up with the end result. So what's to say that if we have enough computing power, we're not able to entirely simulate a human body on an atomic level? And that's when it starts to get kind of meta, and I believe if that does happen, or when that does happen, we actually will be able to replicate consciousness as well, because all consciousness and memory is just a bunch of chemicals in our brain in a specific state, much like kind of solid state drives or whatever. It's just like the position and kind of the mix of the chemicals that form everything. And if we really just scanned it as it is, exactly, photocopied it down to the molecular level, then theoretically speaking, we should be able to replicate everything. Like you would wake up in that simulation with the exact same thought that you were thinking in that like sub-second. Anyway, yeah, you can see how it kind of starts getting down to the rabbit hole, but down the rabbit hole, it's crazy to think about, but really we're on the cusp of it, and AI is one of those things that will just really exponentially take off. Because if we're able to unlock this universal super intelligence, it could really solve everything, because the AI can train other AIs and they can communicate with each other just super fast. That's another thing. The closer that we get with communication, the faster the rate of technology will increase. The communication between machines, especially AI, is basically instantaneous. So if one AI that's specialized in one thing, maybe it's like trained to figure out how to most efficiently wash dishes or something, right? I mean, who knows? There's all these enterprise solutions or needs. There's always these problems. And maybe there's an AI specifically trained for that. Right now, they're all sandboxed. They're containerized in its own thing. They don't ever get to talk to another AI that cuts lawns. And then there's another AI that solves kind of a bigger problem of maybe health or like how to cure cancer. But like, what's to stop them at a certain point of just an interconnected network where they just talk to each other and they'll be able to figure out together and share the findings instantly, and then that's how it builds up a collective intelligence. So that's another thing. The reason human intelligence, I think, has been kind of exponential so far, which is about to get even more, but so far, has been the collective share of intelligence through communication that we have. So if a researcher in China has a biological breakthrough in their research, traditionally, maybe a long time ago, even just a couple hundred years ago, which again is like pretty small compared to the span of humanity, right? Just a couple hundred years ago when we had ships and we didn't even have planes or anything like that, if they found out something, like we wouldn't know. Maybe like a trader trading like spices or something finds out while being there and comes over the boat and then like shares it. It was limited to that. But now with the internet and everything, as soon as he finds something, it's basically spread. And again, the faster the dispersing of information, I think, the greater this collective intelligence has, and it just builds up over time. So that's my whole stance on AI. Maybe even, I kind of want to talk about it more, but I'm going to cut it short. I think the second thing would be like XR, collectively called like AR and augmented reality, virtual reality. I think it's also solving the communication problem, which I just mentioned is pretty important. It allows us to be in different places and talk to other people much more efficiently. I think commuting and I think it's pretty inefficient, and all this traffic, I think that stuff would be gone soon. And remote work will come forward more with the advancement of communication like that. And then the underlying infrastructure behind all these technologies would be the data infrastructure. So right now there's like all this 5G hype, and I think we're still a few years away from like mainstream 5G, but there's also 6G, 7G, whatever is to come later on. We're gonna deal with a lot of data and a lot of bandwidth, so we need the infrastructure laid out. It's kind of like having the electric grid, right? We need whatever to support all this data. So that's pretty exciting. And then one thing that's kind of deviating from the software side of things would be like even biology. I think synthesized meat is something that's trending now that will definitely be bigger later on. And the way we've been consuming food, I don't think has been changed in like hundreds, if not thousands of years. We just like hunted and gathered, like we just eat whatever's in front of us or what we crave. But we'll soon realize that personal nutrition is very important in our longevity and health. And I think we'll have on-demand food generation and on-demand food or nutrition monitoring. So we'll maybe have some device on us. It's like you're a little low on sugar, you're a little low on whatever vitamin D, and then we'll be able to instantly create a meal that is just perfectly levels us out. So those are my views. And in fact, I don't even know if I have enough storage on my phone to have recorded all this stuff, so I have to check and see if it captured all of it. It's another funny problem to have, just the fact that we run out of storage, but such is the case. and yeah, it should theoretically be recording everything and just uploading everything, right? So I'm stuck for now. We're stuck here in 2019, and but it's also exciting. That means there's a lot of opportunity there to like either capitalize on it, like making money by creating. If you know what's going to happen in the future, you pick one and you create a practical solution to it in the form of a business and help other people solve problems, practical problems. I think that's another way to make money, but I don't know. I've always had this really big fascination with technology and like marveled at it. Sometimes it's so cool that we're able to do the things we do. So that's my 2 cents, more than 2 cents.